Thanks so much for taking time out of your Wednesday evening to spend it here in the spirit of community, mentorship, and learning. I'm your host, Dave Nava. I'm a lead solution engineer at Salesforce and a military trailblazer. Each week, we invite a co-host, in this case, co-hosts, to take part in the conversation so we can leverage their experience, their expertise, and of course, their unique perspectives. The focus for tonight's session is how to overcome gaps in employment and return to the workforce. So, if you've taken a break from work to raise a family or care for a loved one, or if you're just starting out in the job market, this is the session for you. I'd like to welcome and briefly introduce our two co-hosts for tonight's session, Tricia and Tirtha Chavan. Tricia is the Chief Success Officer for Global Financial Services, as well as the General Manager of EMEA Professional Services in the Financial Services vertical at Salesforce. She has deep experience building and advising organizations on growth strategies across a wide variety of industries, including e-commerce, entertainment, life sciences, and technology. Tirtha is a Senior Manager of Strategy at Salesforce, specializing in success plans to expedite the time to value for customers across all industries. She's also the co-president of the Salesforce Women's Network HQ, Salesforce's largest equality group. It is so great to have you both co-hosting office hours with me, Tricia and Tirtha. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having us. Tirtha and I get to work together on the Equality Forum, so we know each other well. And I'm very excited to speak with this group. And I just want to say a thank you to all of you who have done what you've done in service to our country. So very much appreciate that. And super excited to have this chat today.
Yeah, we're excited as well. If you could each take a moment to kind of further introduce yourselves and share your Salesforce stories, that would be great. Tricia, would you like to start us off?
Sure. So great introduction, David. I feel like you're like almost a broadcaster. You've got that broadcaster vibe going on. And good sound quality. So yeah, you.
Thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm Tricia. My Salesforce journey. So I have been at Salesforce for about a year and a half. I was brought in to work on the services team under Lori Steele, who Lori and I were partners together back at PwC Consulting and at IBM. And I was brought in to lead large-scale programs and to kind of incubate what that might look like for services. And it was wildly successful, so successful that they decided to break it apart and put it into the organization. So now I lead our financial industry services team for services. And then as David mentioned, I'm also the Chief Success Officer globally, it's like a 2 for the price of 1 job, which is really fun. It's an influencer role as the Chief Success Officer as we try to lean deeper and deeper into operating as a global company. So it's very exciting. It's actually a motion that I'm really excited about, and I'm getting to meet many of our colleagues outside of EMEA, which is great. I'm a lifetime consultant. I have been doing management consulting almost my entire life, except for the two other jobs I had. One, I took a break to stay home and care for our children, and we'll talk more about that today. And the second, I was the COO of a startup company that was an online marketplace. Other than that, consulting's my jam. It's in my blood. I'm addicted to it. Most people do have this twisted addiction to trying to solve really complex problems, never getting bored in the routine of the job, and just always doing something new. So really love my work. The work that we're doing within services and the reorganization that we've had to an industry focus has been tremendously exciting this year. So I don't know if any of you here are in services, but we've undergone a pretty substantive organizational change this year, and I do believe it's all leaning in for the better. So that's me in a short nutshell. I am a mom. We have 2 children. My husband is also a lifetime consultant. We live in the Bay Area. Our kids we're empty nested. Our last one is in college in his senior year. So we're looking forward to the next stage of life without pets and babies. So Tirtha, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. So first of all, thank you everyone for joining today, and so great to meet all of you virtually. I'm joining from San Francisco, California. And as David mentioned, I am a senior manager of strategy at Salesforce, which means I was hired to innovate and scale success plans at Salesforce, which help our customers get the most out of our Salesforce platform. As David also mentioned, I'm also a co-president of Salesforce Women's Network San Francisco chapter. And I actually took that role on my day 5 at Salesforce. So very, very passionate about equality and giving back to the community. Outside of this, I am very passionate about really the entire product community. So as a product manager, I'm a featured speaker at Product School, which is a community of 1 million plus product managers worldwide, and I get to help inspire the next generation of product leaders to create innovative products and apply their best practices at work. I haven't taken a break in my career till now, except for the time when I went back to school. But I do want to share with you that I do get to interview candidates multiple times during my previous role as well as in my current role. And I have interviewed and hired candidates who had a gap on their resume. And I'm here today to share with you some of the best things that they did to actually highlight why, some of the things that they did during the interview process, why, and the reasons why they were hired. So really excited to chat with this group and share some of my learnings as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing your stories, Tricia and Tirtha. There's a lot of consultants and future consultants in the room, Tricia, so you may get some questions thrown your way. I can definitely identify with the consultant mindset, having done it for a couple of years myself, and you get addicted to the constant change and the challenging problems for sure. And then I know we're all excited, Tirtha, to dig into kind of what it was about those candidates that caught your eye and enabled them to make it past the interview process, even though they had a gap in their employment. So I'm really excited to dig into that. Before we get to that, though, we'll go ahead and cover some admin items. So if you're joining for the first time, first of all, welcome. I always like to explain the purpose of these office hours before we open the floor for questions and discussion. So these office hours are an informal get-together for gathering with military trailblazers and allies. Absolutely everyone is welcome to explore non-technical Salesforce career and branding related topics to help you achieve your professional development and career-related goals. So for this next hour, this is your opportunity for collaborative mentorship. Everyone on the call is encouraged to step up and help to answer questions from your perspective, as well as ask them, which will, of course, provide additional diversity of experience of the answers given and a much richer dialogue. Do keep an eye on the chat window during tonight's session. As you can probably already tell, I have been posting in there already, and I will continue to post. I share Tricia and Tirtha's LinkedIn profiles, so if you want to connect with them, you can do so, as well as some other things about Military Trailblazer office hours. And we'll be posting in knowledge articles, employment opportunities, volunteer opportunities, those sorts of things throughout the rest of the session. So this is your session. If you'd like to ask a question at any point during today's session, you're not interrupting, feel free to do so. We're waiting for you to do it. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up, no worries. You can post your questions in chat, and I will do my best to respond to hands raised and questions in chat in the order received. If you want to post your LinkedIn profile, as I've seen that we like to do, go ahead and network in chat while we're having the session. That's fantastic. And then finally, this session is being recorded. So if you want to share an attribution-free comment, maybe you want to ask a question, you don't want your boss to know about it, totally fine. Just let me know before speaking, and then I'll make sure it's edited out of that final recording. So now that administrative items are covered, would like to get into it. So on the overall kind of topic of preparation and getting started, and this is for either Tricia or Tirtha, for those who want to make a career transition, but they really aren't sure where their interests lie, that first step, what's your advice for exploring and discovering a new career path?
I would say, based on what I have done in my career so far, the first thing I would recommend everyone to do is self-reflection. If you journal, take some time to actually think about, number one, what kind of problems do I like solving? Second, what brings me joy? What are the aspects of my previous roles that refill my energy cup? And that's really important. If you know what refills your energy cup, you want to do more of that, right? Third, think about what you want to learn in your next role. And it can be something from finance perspective, business perspective, or specific skill. You want to manage people, write those things down. And number four, think about aspects of your previous role that you really disliked, whether it was a specific type of task, or it was specific culture, or specific team, or specific job. And just knowing these things will give you more clarity in terms of what you really enjoy and where you want to go. I would also recommend, if you have little kids, think about like the aspect of the work-life balance and work integration. Like, how much time do you want to spend and invest in the job? Do you want to work like 12 hours a day, or do you want to work 8 hours so that you can spend most of your time with your kids? Think about the money aspect as well, or even the location aspect. Where do you want to live? Does this job offer you the flexibility of living anywhere or traveling, right? So think about those aspects and start with journaling, like the problems you want to solve, what brings you joy, the aspects of the job that you don't like, and fourth thing is what do you want to learn in that role. So that's what I would recommend to start with. Trisha, what would you do?
So I 100% agree with what you just said. I think that self-reflection moment is really important, and to be driven by what you enjoy. Like, work is work at the end of the day. It's not meant to be all play, but if a good chunk of your work can truly be sitting in something that gives you joy, and maybe for some people it's purpose, maybe for others it's community, like whatever that thing is that drives you to feel fulfillment, understanding what aspects of your job bring that to you, I think is really important. So I would say that after you do the self-reflection, perhaps the next step for you is, what I suggest is start talking to people. Network enthusiastically and with people you may not have otherwise felt comfortable asking to network with. It's an easy ask. I know there are many introverts in the world. I am not one of them, but I do know that when I am asked by people who are otherwise uncomfortable to say, hey, can I have some one-on-one time? And they're just really curious about what I do and they're trying to self-develop, it's a really exciting conversation for the person on the other side of that table. And I do think it's very difficult to know what a job looks like until you're in it. And I think getting yourself partway there by doing those informational interviews and asking a lot of questions, you can start to gain some sense of visualization, some sense of what that looks like IRL. You know what I mean? So that it's not just the romantic part of the job, it's the actual gritty part of the job, which should be part of those questions. So I would just network, do those informational interviews, be courageous about who you ask for those, know that they 99.9% of the time are going to want to give that time to you, and just start exploring and experimenting with that.
Yeah, that's a great insight, both from the self-reflection and informational interview perspective. And so, I'd like to piggyback on that just to say that there's a danger there, right, if you don't do these things. And I'll give you a case in point. My case, where I was in the military, I knew 5 years out the day I was going to retire. So I had 5 years to prepare, and being a planner, I'm like, okay, great. I'll go be a project manager. It's what I've done my whole life. And so without doing the self-reflection, right, without doing the informational interviews, I went and got my MBA, my project management professional certification, a Lean Six Sigma black belt, certified Scrum Master, all these things. It took years, right? It took 4 years. And then when I started interviewing, I found out I didn't want to be a project manager or a program manager, right? I did the self-reflection too late, and I had the informational interviews, and I was like, wow, that doesn't align with what I want to do at all. And so, I don't look at that as wasted time, but it certainly kind of derailed my career preparation plans. Luckily, at that time, I found Salesforce, and the rest is history. But do the self-reflection and definitely do the informational interviews. It will pay itself off in spades later on. It does take some time, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
So
100%. I do want to add one additional thing. I see a lot of people interacting and connecting on LinkedIn in the chat. Love that. One thing that we usually do when we send connection requests is we don't write where we met and how did we meet and what's the purpose of the connection. So just taking that time, 2 minutes to write that, hey, it was great meeting you at the military office hours that David now hosts, and just writing that context will help you when we are trying to 3 months down the line thinking about, oh, wait, how do I know this person? I'm sure that has happened with many of you that you were like, oh, I have 1,000 connections, but I don't know how I met this person and why I added them. So take that time to write those 2 sentences. That will help you even 3 years down the line that, okay, you met in this event.
Yeah, that's huge, because you can go, as we all know, you can go back to your messages and go look it up and go, oh, there it is right there. Where if it's not there, you're kind of left to guesswork. And that can lead to some awkward conversations as you're trying to scramble and remember where you know this person from. Been there, not fun. So moving on a little bit here, what role does upskilling play in making a career transition? And how important is that, in your opinion?
I can start on that one.
Sure.
I think it falls in line with the same words that Tirtha was using earlier, which is pursuing, like, being curious and self-reflecting on what you enjoy and leaning into that. So whatever drives you, if it is compensation that drives you, for many people that is, like, then okay, where are those big paying jobs and what do I need in order to get that? Do I need more hard skills under my belt? Do I need another degree under my belt? If it's something different, I think it's just about being really curious and leaning into that versus being programmatic. And I would ask you to give yourself permission to explore things that you may not ever have looked at before, like really flexing into something that may be extremely foreign and doing a light upskill lift on that, right? Like, upskilling doesn't mean you have to spend 4 years getting a degree in something. Upskilling could be an online class or a weekend seminar, or, right? There's so many different ways to just kind of dip in and try and see and be like, oh, does that touch my interest or not? I can tell you personal story. Having been a lifetime consultant, there's not a lot of extra hours in a consultant's world, right? But when I did find those extra hours, I always found myself leaning into this really right-brained activity, this really creative activity of design. And it's something that I then just took I did a seminar on for the weekend. I then started taking extracurricular classes in the evenings, like a couple days a week. Next thing I knew, I was learning how to do sketching and designing and CAD and all this fun stuff. And I just dug it. And it was so, so different than what I was doing in my day-to-day career, that it actually felt to me very enriching. It was an upskilling of something that gave me energy and gave me a different set of purpose. And what's interesting about that is it paid off for me later in my career. And I don't know when the right time is to sort of tell my personal story, David. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity throughout this. But when I took a break from work, I leaned into that design work and found a lot of purpose in that. And then that just steamrolled and ended up being my COO role in a startup company. So you never know. So pursue what is of interest, experiment, explore. Don't feel stuck in like just hierarchical movements. Think about the horizontal movements in your world.
Yeah, great point. And I know, Tirtha, you might want to comment as well. Afterwards, let's definitely, Tricia, get into your story, because I think now would be a great time to do that. Tirtha, did you want to jump in before then?
I do want to add just one thing. Those of you who are considering upskilling, Salesforce has launched a new program for career starters where you can actually join Salesforce Fundamentals. It's a free virtual learning journey to earn your first Salesforce credentials. So any one of you who is interested in that Salesforce certification and credentials, I'm going to post a link to a LinkedIn post which has all the information about how to get started with Salesforce. So that can be your starting point if you're thinking about upskilling and really thinking about talking about how to that resume gap and sharing like what did you learn in that 2 months or 3 months or 1 year or 2 years of gap that you had. So here is the post, and Tricia has an amazing story. So let's actually hear that story from her.
I don't know that it's amazing, but it's mine, and so I'll share it. So as I mentioned, lifelong consultant. My husband also was a consultant, and we had 2 small children. I remember, and our lives were crazy. I made partner while I was pregnant, which that was a little while ago. I'll tell you that. My kids are all launched, and I remember my senior partner saying to me, "You're never going to make partner pregnant." There was no other female partner on the West Coast, so it was a bold statement. I did make partner, which was great, loved it, but just to give you a sense of time of where I grew up in my career. Our children were 4 and 6, I think. And I was traveling home from Europe on a plane, and my husband was traveling to Europe on a plane, and something happened to one of our children, and neither one of us were reachable. And it was just one of those moments of complete and utter, like, what are we doing? And forced us to both reflect and say, is this the way that we want to move forward in the world? Coincidentally, PwC had been bought by IBM Consulting. So I was living in this very different world. To go from a partnership to the largest corporation in the world was a culture shock. And I really honestly wasn't loving it. So it became this sort of decision of, this isn't working for our family at the moment. So I decided to go on a leave of absence, which then ended up just meant I stopped working. I will tell you, it was an identity crisis that I suffered during that time, to go from an executive that, when you had social interactions, I was kind of always talking to, and I'm going to say this, and I hope you understand this is time and place in its orientation, but I was always talking to the men at the social events because they were the ones working, and I related to that. When I found myself plucked out of that and into a world with a lot of stay-at-home moms, which just happened to be my community, it was a very different scene. And it was hard. It was really hard because that was so much about my identity, was being that person that had this big career and was successfully managing children and work, which I wasn't successfully doing after all. So long story short, I paused, but then I got really, really antsy very quickly and did those things that ended up helping me, which at the time it wasn't intentional. I was just following my heart, quite honestly, and my soul at this moment to say, how can I enrich myself? Because I needed more in my life. So I started joining some nonprofit boards. I was on the board for Planned Parenthood. I was on the board for child abuse prevention. I dedicated a lot of my time to service in that way and got so much back from it. But at the same time, I was picking up skills, right? And I didn't know, this wasn't intentional. I was just following my heart and my purpose. And then, as I mentioned, the design world, got into that. We were buying and selling homes, and my husband finally said, enough, we're done buying and selling homes, let's start doing it for other people, which I did. And then I ended up flipping homes, which ended up being quite lucrative in the Bay Area. And then that led me to a friend of mine started a company called Previously Owned by a Gay Man, which is a very catchy, interesting title, but it was online furniture, used high-end online furniture. So it was a marketplace. It was a tremendous opportunity, did that for a couple of years. And that was intense, being part of a startup and having all those different roles and launching back into work. But I did manage to find a lot of balance. It was not nearly as demanding as the consulting space. And then as the children were leaving, I said, okay, I want to get back into the workforce in full time, back into consulting. And I spent, I think it probably took me a couple of years to find the job that I wanted to take. And part of that was the push-pull. And I don't know how many of you in the room have had this kind of gap where you've stayed, you've stopped working for whatever family situation you have or personal situation that you have, but coming back in is challenging. And I was out of that professional workforce for a good 10 years. So I felt slightly inadequate. I felt slightly outdated technically, like the technology had really moved forward and I had not. So there was a lot of self-doubt in that process, but I just found leaping back into it, doing a ton of interviews, being super vulnerable, being very transparent about what my skills were, what skills I had picked up while I was at home, and what I did not pick up and what I did not know. I have heard questions from people as I share this story about, like, how did you get back in? And I think we can talk more about that later, David. I think you might have some questions around that, and I'll go deep into those. But one of my greatest values is authenticity. And I think if you try and flub your way through that in a way that's not authentic to who you actually are, it's going to show. And I didn't. And I think that helped. So then I landed back in consulting, and then eventually Lori Steele, who, as I mentioned, we had been partners at PwC, said, come over, I need you to do this work at Salesforce. And so here I am. So that's the story.
Awesome. Thank you. No, that's fantastic. It sets context, and it really tees up all the kind of the questions that we want to dive into. And so, my brain kind of works in a process-centric fashion, which may be why I'm doing what I'm doing with Salesforce. But from the beginning, right? So when you first start, the first thing that you're going to be working on is your resume. You have to get that into shape if you're going to be returning to the workforce. I guess, Tricia, what tips can you offer, right, from your personal experience with revamping your resume after a 10-year gap? And then Tirtha, what have you seen on resumes where it's clear there's a workforce gap, but you're like, wow, this person, I can tell there's a gap, but they have compensated for it, mitigated it by what they've put on their resume, and they communicated their value to me. If you could both kind of, from your own individual perspectives, talk to that, I think that would be helpful in getting us started on this whole process of getting back to work. Yeah,
great question. Okay, so I think of two things when I think of revamping your resume. Well, three, actually. One is be honest. I think any reader of a resume is going to understand and see that gap right away. And I think you should just own it and say, here's what I was the COO of the Napper family house, right? That's what I did. And here's the stuff that I did, or I was on this, whatever it is. I don't think you should try and pretend it's something that it's not. I think you should own and lean into what it was and talk about what you did with that time that enriched you as a person and makes you more valuable as an employee. So thinking about it from the employer's point of view, what about that could bring more value to them. The second is I would actually invest in having someone help you edit your resume and your LinkedIn profile. I did that and it paid off in spades. All the resumes now, and many of you probably know this, but they're all read by computers first. And unless you do some SEO, unless you have those key letters and keywords in there, you're going to get lost unless you've done your good networking and you're getting interviews outside of the process. But if you're throwing a resume out there, I would definitely invest in that, whether it's a friend or you pay someone. There's lots of people out there that know how to do this and really revamp those resumes to be as catchy as possible. And then the third thing is, and this isn't just the resume, but it is along the networking side, like dive in deep to connecting in LinkedIn. You all are so active here, what other venues you have. And there are a lot of organizations out there, and I tried to remember what the name is, the one that I used, but I couldn't. But there are a lot of organizations out there specifically for rejoiners. And there are lots of companies that have rejoiner programs. So just do your research around what those are. Oh, the Mom Project is one. Yes. Returnships. Thank you. See, look, you guys are so good. And, I looked at all of those and I ended up going to an event at Stanford that the Stanford Alumni Association had put on, and they were talking about the skills of the people in the room. And I was blown away. There were probably 400 people in the room, and there were tons of potential employers there. So it was a great networking. And they called out the average education of people, the levels of people in their prior jobs. These are really smart, successful people who have a lot to contribute. And it just highlighted for me that, one, you're not alone in this process. Two, there's a lot of great talent out there that's done this. I don't think it's anything to, like I said, not own the break and just be honest about it on your resume.
I love everything that Tricia mentioned. And in addition to that, during the interview, let's say you have revamped your resume, two things that I would say. Once you revamp your resume and your elevator pitch, it is really, really important that you have an elevator pitch that summarizes what you bring to the table. Once you have that, talk to a few friends, talk to your previous mentors, even your previous manager, and share that elevator pitch and ask them what they remember about what you shared. Why is it important? Because every decision made about your career is made in the room you're not in. So they need to, it's a practice session for them so that they can practice talking about you and what you bring to the table in front of the other people and potential hiring managers in the organization, or a friend that they are recommending that, hey, you should definitely work with this person. So you want to see what they remember about your elevator pitch. And that's a practice session where you will get to practice, they will get to remember and rehearse kind of what they will share with other people. So that's the first thing once you have your resume. Second thing, once you get an interview call, focus on what you bring to the table. Don't talk about most of the time like about the past, but talk about the future you. Talk about what you bring to the table in the organization. And we can talk about this in the later part of the discussion, but research about the company, research the hell out of the company. Read about everything that's online, listen to their latest earnings call if it is a public company. And I would also recommend like connecting to a few friends if you who already work at the company, and actually ask questions about the culture, about the working structure, etc. And based on that information, like form your own point of view in terms of why you want to work for that company, which is not just based on what's available online, but you have also done research by talking to the real people who work there every day. So that's your answer to why do you want to work there and what excites you about that company's future, based on the actual numbers, based on actual quotes from the interview, from the employees, as well as what you can bring to the table. So those are the things I would focus on. And if I can just summarize very quickly, the people who were hired with the actual gap, those people focused on what they bring to the table. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what they did specifically in that interview process as well.
No, that's fantastic. The elevator pitch and the research, great tools for standing out in the interview process. And so, we talked a little bit about how do you explain that gap on the resume? And Tricia talked about owning it and being very forthright about the fact that you had a gap, why you had the gap, and what you learned. My question to both of you, I guess, Tricia, from a cover letter perspective, did you use any cover letters when you were applying? And or, Tirtha, have you seen cover letters that have been accompanied a resume to explain that gap? Or what's the best way to position that on the resume, I guess, is the ultimate question.
Yes, I did use cover letters. I don't believe that I explained my gap. I mean, just from my personal, I didn't hit it on the cover letter. I think what I tended to focus on cover letters was, and I would do this in the interview too, so I think it's applicable to both. And I do this in my day-to-day life as a consultant, is I'm always putting myself in my customer's shoes, like looking at it from their point of view. What problem are they trying to solve? What is important to them in a candidate? Where, as Tirtha said, and yes, of course, do all your research, know what you're up against, and learn how to speak to yourself in very succinct and eloquent terms, but know what they're interested in. And I actually would, in my cover letters, try and put some hypotheses out there about what I thought that was. So, my understanding is blah, 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 blah. You're looking for X, Y, Z. Let me tell you how I can bring X, Y, Z to the table. And then when I would get to the actual interview, and David's probably like, you're getting ahead of my questions, but once I got to the actual interview, I would usually I literally would spend 75% of my time asking them questions. And I find, as an interviewee, I find that far more interesting than someone who just answers your questions. It's so insightful to how their brain works, how they would show up in front of a customer or someone within our own organization. And what it gives you is tremendous insight. You put them in a position of talking about themselves, which people love to do, and sharing with you things that are going to be very critical to you as you continue to go through the interview process. So highly recommend thinking. I think really that the net of it is thinking about it from the customer or the interviewer's point of view and trying to position your cover letter and your interviews around that.
I love that. And I love the fact that you led by asking questions, because it's hard to ask good questions. It really is. And if you can do that, to your point, it showcases the fact that you have all those other soft skills that are required for really any customer facing role. I'm doing discovery all day, every day to put myself in the customer's shoes. So yeah, that's a great point. We've got a hand raised. Annie, did you have a question or comment?
A comment about what Tricia was saying when it comes to interviewing. You're interviewing Ben as well. So for me, when I was interviewing, I didn't want to ask Google questions. I didn't want the top 10 questions Google recommended, because I can Google those answers. If I can find a Google answer for a question, I shouldn't be asking it, right? So my goal for every interview I had was a moment. It was a question that came out of my research, and it got the interviewer. They were, a lot of times they're handing off candid answers because they're getting those Google questions. And so when you do something like at my Deloitte interview, I asked one of the people, I said, Deloitte is touting their well-being and their well-being programs. How have you seen it change in the last year? And is there something you'd like to see added? The person actually told me, I have to think about that. Nobody's ever asked me. That was my gotcha moment, right? And I got an honest, sincere answer, and I got a real insight into the culture of Deloitte instead of just the candid answers that everybody kind of has. So think of those moments that, you don't want to put necessarily somebody in the spot. Well, you had some bad press, and find what's interesting to you. Well-being programs, military programs are really important to me. And I want to know about those, because those tell me what's important for the culture I'm looking for. Find those questions that's important for you to find out what the culture you're looking for is, right? So, thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, because ultimately, what is the whole point of an interview, right? Like, if you think about it, it's to stand out. It's to get that second interview. And if you're asking, to your point, any canned questions, you're not going to stand out. But if you kind of set them back on their heels, like, whoa, I've never been asked that before, they're going to remember you, and they're going to be more likely to include you in the next round of interviews because you asked those impactful, insightful questions.
Can I just pile on to that? I
Sure.
actually think some of the best interviews I've had on both sides of the table are when you actually start engaging in a strategy type discussion within the context of the interview. So you're riffing off each other about what are the growth levers for this company? How can we restructure this organization better? Like, what are the key competitors in the landscape? Like all those things, when you actually engage in that back and forth dialogue and work together, it starts to show them what it's like to work with you, and you what it's like, to Annie's point, work with them, because you're interviewing on both sides of that. So I would encourage you to get into that sort of more casual space of those discussions. I think it makes for so much more insight and fun, quite honestly, in an interview.
Yeah, it's a new concept, interviews being fun, but they can be.
I loved them.
So I want to kind of wrap up the resume questions, and then what we'll do at that point is we'll take a quick break for a group photo, which we can choose to participate in if you want to, and then we'll move on to interviewing. We've already kind of dabbled in interviewing, but I want to take a step back just to ask this question, because I've heard it asked at previous sessions, and really would like to get Tricia and Tirtha, both of your perspectives on it. And Tricia, you had talked about, during your your break from work when you were raising your children, how you had discovered that you had not only probably skills that you didn't know you had because you were focusing in a different area, but these passions that came out, these creative passions that cause you to go down different paths of exploration and discovering new skills. How is the operative word, how can candidates showcase those non-technical skills that were obtained during an employment gap on their resume and their LinkedIn profile to communicate that value? Because ultimately that's what you want to do, is communicate value.
It's a really good question. I know how to share it. I don't know that I have a great answer on where it communicates value. What I do think it communicates is your roundedness as a person and your ability to be multidimensional. And that doesn't mean, like, if you're like David, you said you're passionate for process, like maybe your outside things outside of work still feed into that, and that just doubles down on what your interests are. I think in today's employment world, there's a great deal of more open-mindedness to looking at candidates that are diverse in the largest sense of the word. And I think as you share what you're doing, it may not mean you do better at that one skill needed for that job, but it shows you may bring value to the organization by having a different way of thinking or bringing something interesting to the table that you can connect with other colleagues in their community about, and that it makes you an interesting person. I mean, really at the end of the day, and this is something I would ask all of you to do, is put down, like, what are the top 3 things you get out of a job? And I know we talked about self-reflection, but whenever people would say, what's your ideal job? I'm like, I don't have an ideal role. I can tell you that the ideal things are, I want to be working to solve tough problems, customer facing always, and that I wanted to be working with people who challenged me critically and were fun to work with. And doesn't really matter what the actual role was to me. It was having those criteria. So when you talk about enrichment of yourself, those things that you do outside of work, that you did on your break, whatever those were, I think that brings a more dynamic and complex self to the table and makes people more interesting and fun to work with. So I think it's okay that it doesn't apply to the actual skill.
Yeah, I love that, and that you're not limiting yourself within the boundaries of a specified subset of roles and trying to, in some cases, fit a square peg in a round hole. Right. Rather, you're just identifying kind of your meta passions. And then if any roles come across that meet all those, hey, let's go explore that. That's fantastic. I think it probably opens more doors and is a more flexible approach to pursuing career paths. So I appreciate that perspective. Do you want to add anything to that, or?
The only thing that I would add is, if you are associated with any nonprofit where you are volunteering on a weekly basis or just weekend, think about your impact to the community. Think about the problems you are solving there with the limited resources. And even the fact that you are being resourceful within your community, within that nonprofit, is a good skill that you can talk about. And leverage the power of social media. You all are on LinkedIn. Think about how you can actually talk about your impact, talk about the work that you're doing, the kind of problems you love to solve on LinkedIn, so that that's a way you can actually share the kind of problems you have solved in the past, the kind of problems you want to solve, and what excites you about the future of a specific company. The only thing that I would say, I'm a product manager. So when I think about interviews and some of the best candidates that were hired, even with the gap, those candidates came prepared to talk about their experience of that product as the end user. They downloaded a trial version. They actually went through the entire experience. They brought their point of view on what's working with the product. What would they add on the roadmap as a product manager? So they were thinking as if they already had the role, and what would they work on in the next 3 to 5 to 6 months. So that shows how they solve problems, their proactive nature, and how they will actually add value to the organization. So the conversation is not about the resume gap, but more about the future and the strategies and how it aligns with where the organization is going.
Yeah, that's great. And if you've been listening, the under theme kind of throughout this entire conversation is it whatever you're at in the application process, right? The hiring process, whether it's resume, whether it's interview, whether it's second interview, you want to communicate how you can add value. And that's been brought up time and time again in different contexts. So think about that. Kathleen has a fantastic question that I want to get to. She asks, can we hear more about the women's groups and other groups or conferences, Salesforce or not, that have been instrumental to your success or that fill your cup? Great question.
Tirtha, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. So to answer your question, Kathleen, 2 things that refill my energy cup. Actually 3. Number one of the reasons why I joined Salesforce Women's Network San Francisco chapter as a co-president on my day 5 is even within Salesforce, I'm learning new skills, and it's a good sandbox environment. And I don't know if some of you know what sandbox is. Sandbox is an environment before production where you can actually test your code, right? And that's an environment where I learn new skills. It's a safe environment to learn because even if I fail, I'm failing internally within a safe group, and it's not my day job. So I'm learning people leadership skills. I'm leading a team of 12 volunteers. So I'm learning how to inspire them, how to motivate them. I'm learning the skills of how to communicate and grow a community of more than 1,200 members at this point, and how to keep them engaged. So it's a really great skill set that I'm learning with the Women's Network. The second thing I'm thinking about is Product School. Product School reached out to me, and it's a great way to improve my public speaking skills when I'm speaking in front of a really huge community of 1 million plus members, and really share my knowledge, give back to the community, and at the same time, improve and build upon my public speaking skills. And the third thing, and this is something probably some of you can already start doing, is mentor students at your grad school or at your college. Reach out to the person who is in charge of the careers at your college and ask them, hey, is there a way I can give back to the community? They will definitely say that, yes, can you come and speak about this to our students, current students, and do that. And that's another way where you are building and honing your mentorship and coaching skills, which will also be transferable skills in your day job when you're talking about that in the interview. So if you are currently not a people manager, but want to move into a people leadership role, that's also a way you can say, I'm not a people manager, but I do mentor 10 students from my college who are aspiring product managers. I speak to the product school community and help them learn the best practices. And that's a way, or even with the Women's Network, I'm leading a team of 12. And it is so important because I'm influencing without authority since they don't report into me. So I think you can do tons of work outside of your job that will help you to get that dream job that you are eyeing for.
That's great, Tirtha. So I'll just add to that. I love the question. Thanks for asking it, Kathleen. And I would say in general, when I think about groups I've joined, at least in the latter half of my career, I was probably more intentional and, dare I say, a little more manipulative in terms of like what I joined because I thought it was going to get me something for my career. The latter half of my career, I've spent more on just enriching myself because I can, and it fills my cup. So it kind of lands in the latter half of your question here of filling my cup. And I would say the Women's Network, I'm the executive sponsor for the headquarters in San Francisco, and love working with Tirtha and the team. And it's really, for me, what that does is allows me to meet a ton of people that I otherwise would never have met. And it brings me so much joy to be able to take a moment from my day job that gets so intense and think about the broader aspects of Salesforce and the culture. I joined during COVID, so having a sense of community and connection here has been challenging to achieve. And having that has helped provide that. It's just connecting on a human level with other people and feeling that connection that makes me feel like I'm part of something bigger than just myself. I would also highly recommend, and I think this advice was given to me a long time ago, and I didn't really put it into practice until about the last 10 years, and it's been very fruitful, but sort of creating your own personal advisory group. And companies have boards of directors, and their own advisory groups, but having your own personal one where you can ask people who are either friends, prior colleagues, mentors, someone you admire, whatever it is, a friend's friend, a friend's parent, whatever. I've created my own sort of advisory group that allows me to brainstorm and vent and get ideas from and share and get support and get networking. Like, it's so rich how many layers it's brought to me. And as a side note, I've been able to bring together what I consider an amazing group of people that have come to get to know each other as well. So think about that. And I think it's one of those things that's an easy ask of people. And people, I have found, are always really excited to play that role, and they end up getting as much out of it as you do.
I'm going to come off mute there. Thank you so much. I want to piggyback on a couple of things. So I love the term sandbox environment. Having that place where you can try out new things, pursue your passions. This, is my sandbox environment where I get to, pretend like I have public speaking skills and actually practice those. And I've gotten better over time.
Great job, David.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
And then, so the other thing and I wanted to draw additional attention, Tricia, to your comment, where initially you were joining employee resource groups or events to try to leverage them as tools to further your career. And then eventually you're like, no, you know what? I'm going to join groups that I'm passionate about. And I think if you approach the latter strategy, because you're passionate about it, it will end up being a tool that you can then leverage to further your career. But if you pursue it from a utilitarian perspective, where you're like, I just want to get something out of it, you're coming into it probably less authentic than you normally would be if you're passionate about it. And so something to keep in mind.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm sure you've all interviewed people when they have those volunteer points on their resume, and you can tell in talking to them about it that they were checking a box, right? I think it's so obvious. So do what you actually get that from. It'll show up when you speak about things, when you talk, share examples of it. I think just being your authentic self in that is so much more effective and rewarding. Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to kind of piggyback on, which I love, and I do, is the personal advisory group. So anybody can have a personal advisory group. It's just folks that you bounce ideas off of. And if you wonder why, MTOH, Military Trailblazer Office Hours, has been implementing some changes and we've been doing things differently, it's because we have a personal advisory group for this. I put together a team of 5 folks, and 2 of the folks are on this call tonight. And they help me kind of imagine the realm of the possible and step outside of my brain and get some advice and leverage diversity of experience. And it doesn't matter what you do, you can have that too, right? And be able to use that to further your career. It's a great, great tool. And you can have multiple personal advisory groups, depending on what you're wanting to accomplish. We're going to get to interviews, more interview questions, and how to prepare in just one second, but I do want to recognize Iris with a question or comment.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Tricia and Tirtha, for being here. This is extremely exciting, and I love both of your stories. It's extremely motivating. I just wanted to put a shameless plug out, though, because that comment about that plug, personal advisory panel, I had the same kind of situation where I was out of the workplace for 10 years, and it does shatter your confidence a little bit and you start doubting yourself. And things really changed for me when I went to the Hiring Our Heroes Amplify, and it's a military spouse platform where you're kind of poured into and you're given these options and ideas on how to network, because sitting in this arena, it's completely easy to understand, and everyone on this program understands that about networking and so on. But when you're coming back into that workforce and you have no idea how to network, and LinkedIn seems like a extremely terrifying place, you know what I mean? I can't say enough about getting that panel up and joining something that will feed into you and giving you that confidence boost to take a step out of yourself. So thank you, ladies.
Wow, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much. And
That's
I know
awesome.
it is very hard to network. It is very, very intimidating. Something that I have tried is I identify 3 people, 3 close friends or 3 colleagues I trust, and I go to them and I talk to them about the kind of people I want to meet. And they all have at least one person they can introduce me to. So it's a very warm handoff. And then I'm talking to my friend's friend, right? And then when I talk to them, I talk about like, hey, this is what I bring to the table. This is where I want to go in terms of my career. And then you ask them at the end of the conversation, is there anyone on your team or from your network I can talk to who can actually help me further into this? So instead of doing cold calls and reaching out to people on LinkedIn, you have a person who is actually introducing to the next person. And that's how you can actually keep building your network, even when it seems a little intimidating. I can say that, this is very intimidating for me. I'm doing this for the very first time, but I really appreciate your time and, time investment in me today.
Yeah. And Stephen, I know you have your hand up, but if I could just add to that for a quick second, I want to bounce off something Iris said. Having had that 10-year break as well, Iris, I know how scary it can be and how demoralizing and just somewhat terrifying at times. I experienced every one of those emotions. Think of the like interview process as upskilling yourself. I got so much better after like interview number 100, and I kid you not, I did a ton of them. I had so many resumes that got no responses, the whole bit, but every cover letter I wrote, every twist I made to my resume, every interview I did, by the time I got through that, I had a rhythm that was so much better than when I started. So you're really just, it's an act of upskilling, as scary as it can be. It is. And it almost, like I made a joke of it with my husband. I'm like, God, I'm really good. Why am I so hard to employ? Am I just too old? Like, what is it? And you just start, like, you kind of have to realize it's not personal, and you'll get better and better at it as you go.
Yeah, definitely. Arthur, I did see your question, and we'll get to that in one moment. Stephen, did you want to pose a question or a comment? And then Arthur, we'll turn it over. I'll ask your question here.
Well, something that I wanted to mention, talking about networking. One thing that I recently learned that I do is when someone connects with me, I like to tell them, hey, is there anything I can help you with? If so, please feel free to ask. Mm-hmm. And I've been very, very surprised the response I get, because it may not be immediate. I get an immediate thank you. But then I've had someone reach out to me, hey, do you know anything about CPQ? And I don't. But I might know someone who does. So then I was able to go through my connections and ask, hey, anybody knows anything about CPQ? And I had a couple of people come to me, and I was able to introduce those people. Now I had someone else come to me and say, hey, can you help me with this? Or can you help me with that? And I was like, wow, okay, that's actually pretty fantastic. So that's one of the things I like to do connecting with someone, is just say, hey, if you need help, reach out.
Yeah, these are all great points. And Tirtha, I like your point where it's much less intimidating when you frame it as, I'm not meeting a stranger, I'm meeting a friend of a friend, right? Mm-hmm. And getting that warm handoff. So we've got, about 5-6 minutes left. I want to get to Arthur's question. And if we have time, pose one more question to kind of wrap it up and piggyback on what Iris was talking about, because I think the psychological aspect of re-entering the workforce is huge. And I'd like to end the session with that. But before we do, Arthur asks, resume question. After retiring from the Army this past February, my reality is that I have stayed home and been heavily present with my 2 boys. I'd also joined the Talent Stacker Career Development Program this past January and have intermittently progressed since then. How should I reflect this on my resume? Should both events be on there concurrently or not?
I mean, I'll go back to what I said before, Arthur, which is being authentic and true to what it was. So my answer to that would be yes.
Awesome. Tirtha, did you want to piggyback? Or?
Plus one in terms of what Tricia mentioned. And I would also focus on, like, in your elevator pitch, Arthur, focus on the skills that you have learned. Think about you can actually talk about, like, when I think about military, I think about discipline. I think about integrity. I think about delivering on the commitments that you have made. So talk about those things in your elevator pitch and what you bring from that experience as well, or to the table when you are transitioning into the corporate world.
Awesome. Adam, question or comment from you?
Yeah, look, just a small tip. On LinkedIn, you add a position, but you can also add a career break.
Mhm. Really? Do they have that in there now as an actual ad?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
so
that's
great.
Cool.
That's so great. Yay, LinkedIn. Good for them.
That's awesome. So we've got, great question. We got 2 minutes left. Tricia and Tirtha, do you have time for one more question?
Yep.
Yes.
I do.
Okay, perfect. All right. So the question is, and again, this is kind of related to what Iris was talking about earlier. And I think it's a great point to kind of end the session on. What advice would each of you give for those who are returning to the workforce and are conflicted about determining their value in the marketplace, right? And imposter syndrome, the whole 9 yards. I know that, like, when I go on vacation and I come back after being gone a week, I'm like, oh, can I still do my job? Literally, like, I have imposter syndrome. I can't imagine what a year or more, or even 10 years of break would do. How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's a really good and complex question. And Iris, I want +1 on your message in the chat. I admitted right out of the gate to all of you how vulnerable I felt, how inadequate I felt, like how tough it was, all of those things. I got to a point where I had the advantage of having been very advanced in my career when I stopped. So there was a lot for me to say about what I had accomplished, but I was really honest about what I didn't know. And I carried that into my employment when I started and said, look, I'm really good at XYZ. I am not up to speed on these other things. And so I need to surround myself. I need your help to help me be the kind of leader I need to be and help me fill these gaps. And I have things to teach you. So I think it's just about, again, I know I probably sound like a broken record, but I think it's being authentic and being honest and using that as a lever. No person has it all. Like if you don't understand that, I think that is a weakness, right? So I think when you start to understand what strengths you bring, but also what you don't have for that full picture and how you augment that, I think that actually shows up as a much better leader when you're honest about it. And I think it allows you to create teams around you that create a more ideal team and more collaboration to meet your objectives. So authenticity, I'm just going to end with that again.
Awesome, thank you.
I do want to say one thing in terms of, this is one of my favorite affirmation, and it took me a very long time to figure this out. My self-worth is not tied to my job or how much money I make or how people perceive me. It's literally abundant. So I think I always try to ground myself into the fact that external factors cannot directly affect it. Interview is a great place to show what you bring to the table. So one thing that I had done in one of my roles where I interviewed was I actually built a deck, which was not expected. They did not expect me to build a deck. I built a deck based on, hey, I believe these are the problems you're trying to solve. This is where I can add value. I don't know everything about this role. You live in this world every single day. So help me understand where I can actually add value and are these the right problems I can help solve. Number one, it was unexpected for them that I came so well prepared with a deck that I had sent 24 hours in advance before the actual interview. So number two, they actually know how I think through and solve the problems in terms of the business problems, identifying the opportunities to add value to the team. And the last thing I would say is that's also a great way, because now you're not talking about the past, but you're talking about how you can add value in the future. And you're giving them a taste of who you are, how you think, and how you solve problems. So I would leave you, all of you, with that.
And those are great points to leave us with. Thanks so much, Tricia and Tirtha, for the past hour and kind of inviting us into your perspectives on how to return to the workforce after a gap. So very much appreciated. Thank you so much.